The studio froze. Not the kind of pause you get during a commercial break, but the kind that makes your heart skip. Johnny Carson stopped mid-sentence, placed his note cards face down on the desk, and did something he had never done in 30 years of broadcasting. He looked directly into the camera. Not at the audience. Not at Ed McMahon. Straight into the lens, as if he could see through it, past the control room, past the NBC building, into every living room in America. The band didn't play. Doc Severinson's trumpet stayed silent. Even the audience, trained to laugh at every pause, held their breath. And then Johnny Carson said 6 words that would echo for decades. But to understand why those words mattered, you need to understand what happened 2 hours before the show went live. How did we get here? It was March 1987. The Tonight Show had been running for 25 years, and Johnny Carson was more than a host. He was a ritual. Families planned their evenings around him. Insomniacs found comfort in his voice. Presidents called him for advice. But that night, something was different. The production assistant who handed Carson his pre-show briefing noticed his hands were shaking. Not much, just enough to make the paper rustle. Carson read the note twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't say a word to anyone. The show started normally. Carson walked through the curtain to thunderous applause, delivered his monologue with perfect timing, made Ed McMahon laugh until his face turned red. Everything felt routine. Comfortable. Safe. But those who knew Carson well, the crew who had worked with him for decades, noticed something in his eyes. A heaviness. Like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. The first guest was a comedian, someone young and hungry, doing his best to impress the king of late night. Carson was gracious, laughed at the right moments, set up the punchlines perfectly. But during the commercial break, he did something unusual. He asked the stage manager to bring him a glass of water. Not because he was thirsty. Because he needed a moment. His hand went to his jacket pocket, touched the folded note, then pulled away. The second guest was an actress promoting a new film. She was charming, told a funny story about her dog, and the audience loved her. Carson smiled, nodded, asked follow-up questions. Professional. Polished. Perfect. But when she mentioned her father, something flickered across Carson's face. It was brief, maybe half a second, but the camera caught it. A crack in the armor. Then came the moment no one expected. During what should have been a smooth transition to the third segment, Carson stopped. The actress had just finished her story and was laughing, waiting for Carson's next question. But instead of speaking, he went still. Completely still. His smile faded. He looked down at his desk, at the note cards he always used to guide the conversation. And then, slowly, deliberately, he placed them face down. The studio audience sensed something was wrong. The laughter died. Ed McMahon leaned forward slightly, concerned. Doc Severinson lowered his trumpet. Carson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He had memorized every word. He looked up, not at his guest, not at Ed, not at the audience in the studio. He turned to camera 1. The main camera. The one that broadcast his face into 40 million homes across America. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. I need to tell you something, Carson said. His voice was quiet. Steady. But there was something underneath it, something raw that television audiences had never heard from him before. 2 hours ago, I received news that a young viewer, a boy named Michael, wrote me a letter 3 weeks ago. He was 12 years old. He had leukemia. Carson paused. The silence in the studio was absolute. Michael wrote to tell me that watching The Tonight Show with his family was the only time he could forget about being sick. He said my show made him laugh when nothing else could. Carson's hand tightened around the note. Michael passed away this morning. His mother called the studio to let me know. She said that in his final days he asked her to make sure I got his letter. So tonight I want to read it. Not because it's entertaining. Not because it fits the format of a talk show. But because Michael deserves to be heard. The camera never cut away. The director, usually quick to switch angles, kept camera 1 locked on Carson's face. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't planned. This was real. Carson unfolded the letter. It was written in careful, childlike handwriting on lined notebook paper. "Dear Mr. Carson," he began, his voice steady but softer now. "My name is Michael and I am 12 years old. I have been sick for a long time, but watching your show makes me feel normal. When you tell jokes, I forget about the hospital. When you laugh, I laugh too. My mom says you are the best at what you do, and I agree. I wanted to write to say thank you for making me happy. I hope you keep doing the show forever because kids like me need it. Your friend, Michael." The studio was silent. Not the awkward silence of a joke that didn't land, but the profound silence of people witnessing something sacred. Carson folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk. He looked back into the camera. And then he said 6 words that would be replayed on news broadcasts, quoted in editorials, and remembered for generations. "Michael, I hope you're laughing now." The audience erupted. Not in applause at first, but in something deeper. A collective exhale. A release of emotion that had been building since Carson first stopped the show. Some people in the audience were crying. Ed McMahon's eyes were red. Doc Severinsen turned away from the camera, his shoulders shaking. And Carson, the man who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of the smile, let a single tear roll down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He just sat there, holding Michael's letter, looking into the camera as if the boy could somehow still see him. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. The commercial break should have come next. The producers were frantically signaling from the control room to cut away, to give Carson a moment to compose himself, to return to the safety of the format. But Carson shook his head. He wasn't done. He looked at his remaining guest, a musician scheduled to perform, and mouthed the word, "Later." The musician nodded, understanding immediately that this was bigger than any song. Carson turned back to the camera. "I've been doing this show for a long time," he said. "And I've met presidents, movie stars, astronauts, champions. But tonight, I want to talk about Michael. Because Michael reminded me why we do this. Not for ratings. Not for awards. But because television, at its best, can be a friend. It can sit with you when you're alone. It can make you laugh when the world feels heavy. It can connect us, even when we're miles apart." He picked up the letter again, holding it like it was made of glass. "Michael's mother told me that he watched this show with his whole family. His parents, his little sister, even his grandmother who lived with them. She said those 30 minutes were the only time they could all just be together without thinking about hospitals or treatments or fear. They could just laugh. And that's what Michael wanted me to know. That I gave his family those moments." Carson set the letter down and leaned back in his chair. "I want to make a promise tonight. This letter will stay on my desk for the rest of my time on this show. Every night before I walk through that curtain, I'm going to look at it and remember Michael. Remember that somewhere out there, there's a kid watching who needs to laugh. A family that needs a break from whatever they're facing. And as long as I can give them that, I'll keep showing up." The audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't the usual enthusiastic clapping of a TV crowd. It was slower, deeper, more deliberate. It was the sound of people recognizing that they had just witnessed something that transcended entertainment. Ed McMahon stood up from his chair, walked over to Carson's desk, and placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. No words. Just presence. Doc Severinsen signaled to the band, and they began to play softly, not the usual upbeat Tonight Show theme, but something gentler. A jazz ballad that felt like a prayer. Carson finally broke his gaze from the camera and looked at the studio audience. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for understanding why this matters." He glanced at Ed, then at Doc, then back at the camera. "We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we'll have music, and we'll laugh again, because that's what Michael would want. But for now, just take a moment. Hold the people you love. Tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait. The camera faded to black. Not to a commercial, but to black. For 10 full seconds, American television screens were empty. Silent. And in that silence, millions of viewers sat in their living rooms, some with tears streaming down their faces, some calling their children into the room to hug them, some reaching for the phone to call someone they hadn't spoken to in years. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. When the show returned from break, Carson was smiling again. Not the big, performative smile of a talk show host, but something softer. More real. The musician performed a beautiful song, and Carson listened with his eyes closed, swaying slightly. The show ended with Carson's usual sign-off, but he added something. "And remember," he said, looking into the camera one last time, "you matter. Every single one of you matters." The credits rolled. The audience filed out quietly, many of them stopping to wipe their eyes. The crew stood in place, not moving to strike the set as they usually did. They just stood there, processing what they had witnessed. Ed McMahon approached Carson, who was still sitting at his desk, Michael's letter in his hands. "Johnny," Ed said quietly, "that was the most important thing you've ever done on this show." Carson looked up at his friend and partner of 25 years and simply nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. In the weeks that followed, the network received over 50,000 letters. Parents wrote to thank Carson for reminding them what mattered. Teachers wrote to say they showed the clip in their classrooms. Doctors and nurses wrote from children's hospitals across the country, telling Carson that his words had given hope to families facing impossible situations. And children wrote, hundreds of them, to say that they too were watching, that they too found comfort in his show, that they too wanted him to keep going. Carson kept his promise. Michael's letter stayed on his desk for the remaining 5 years of The Tonight Show. Every night, before the show began, Carson would touch the corner of the letter, a small ritual that no one talked about but everyone knew. It became a talisman. A reminder. A North Star. Years later, after Carson retired and retreated from public life, a young talk show host asked him in a rare interview what his proudest moment was. The host expected Carson to mention a famous guest, a groundbreaking sketch, or perhaps one of his many Emmy awards. Instead, Carson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There was a boy named Michael. I read his letter on the air. That night, I stopped being a performer and started being a person. That's the night I'm most proud of." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The letter itself became part of television history. After Carson's death, his estate donated it to the Smithsonian Institution, where it now sits in the National Museum of American History. The exhibit is called The Power of Connection, and Michael's letter is displayed alongside the note cards Carson placed face down that night. Visitors stand in front of the case, reading the careful handwriting of a 12-year-old boy who just wanted to say thank you, and they understand something fundamental about why television matters. But the real legacy of that night isn't in a museum. It's in the countless times someone stopped their show, their speech, their routine to acknowledge a deeper truth. It's in the late-night hosts who followed Carson and learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, that breaking format can be the most powerful format of all. It's in the families who still gather to watch TV together, looking for that connection Michael's family found. And it's in the lesson Carson taught without ever saying it directly, that the greatest thing you can give someone is the feeling that they are seen, that they matter, that their story deserves to be heard. Johnny Carson looked into the camera and said 6 words America never forgot. "Michael, I hope you're laughing now." But what he really said, in that moment and in everything that followed, was something much bigger. He said that we are all Michael. We all need to laugh. We all need to be seen. We all need someone to remind us that we matter. And that night, through the simple act of reading a letter on live television, Carson showed 40 million people what it means to truly connect. 6 words. 1 letter. A moment that proved television could heal. Carson showed us that the greatest performance is no performance at all. Just truth, delivered when it matters most.